How would you answer someone if someone came up to you on the street and said, "Do you want to buy a stopwatch?" You'll be like, "I'm okay, actually. I've got that facility on my phone. That's fine. Okay." And you just walked off, and he stops you again. He says, "How about an MP3 player?" You're like, "Actually, I've got that on my phone. It's fine, thanks." Okay, you walk off again. He just stops you again. "Okay, how about a map? I've got this map here. Do you want the map?" Like, "No, I've got Google Map. It's fine, thanks." Okay, how about a compass? "No, I can get a compass on my phone as well." "How about an alarm?" "I've got an alarm." Okay. How would you respond? You would say, "My smartphone has everything I need." And Paul wants the Colossian church to have a similar sort of answer. That everything they need is in Christ. Not that Jesus is a kind of like a pocket-sized God that's convenience, but Jesus surpasses everything else. There was a time when I was a new Christian, and maybe just a few months of being saved, and I had a job in Brighton, and I filmed this artist, and seen in a house, and there's a cross, and I was just full of beans, just a new Christian. Okay, well, you must be a Christian. And I was explaining Jesus to her, and she was like, and she was so just like loved me so much. She was such a lovely lady, and she's like, "Oh, that's so great! That's so pleased that you discovered this." I was like, "Great! So you're a Christian too?" She said, "But there's so much more." I was like, "What?" "Yeah, there's so much more. There's so much in the spiritual world. There's so much more you can learn and understand and gain knowledge here and there." And she listed out all these things. I was like, "Whoa!" But what about this bridge illustration I just showed you? Like, no, there's so much more. This is just a start. Oh, I hope you do like grow up in your faith. Like, that's weird. The Colossian church is a new church, full of new believers. It was started from a man called Epaphras, who preached the gospel of grace. They fully understood it, and then he goes to visit Paul in prison to make them known to him. So Paul writes the letter to the Colossian church with Timothy, and we understand that he understands everything about this church through Epaphras. And there's this great scene in chapter 4 where Epaphras is praying for the church. And we discussed that last week, that it's a great idea to know what the people are praying for in these letters in the New Testament, and you really understand the grasp and the thrust of a letter through what they're praying for. And Epaphras is praying for them to be fully assured and stand firm. And through listening to Epaphras' prayers, Paul writes this letter. And a key verse in this letter is found in chapter 2. Can't wait to get to chapter 2. Chapter 1's amazing, but chapter 2 is like, whoa. And there's a key verse in chapter 2 to understand the whole letter, just in a couple of lines here. "Just as you received Christ, Jesus as Lord, continue your lives in him." Not that we become Christians to continue our lives, but we continue our lives in him. Rooted and built up in him. We can build ourselves up in other ways, but build himself up and be strengthened in Jesus. Strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflow with kindness. We discussed last week, when you fully understand the gospel of grace, that thankfulness is a natural thing to come out of you. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophies which depends on human tradition and elemental forces of this world rather than on Christ. And chapter 2 is just like littered with what the society around them is going to delude them with, what they're going to be deceived with, what they're going to be disqualified with. You can't worship God, you have to worship angels. You can't really know God, you have to find secret knowledge of yourself. That surpasses what God can give you. You can't really get to God, you have to do this and do that. That's how you get to God. And just like this lady was trying to deceive me, they were deceiving, the world around was deceiving this church, these young believers. And what they're told to do is stand firm, be fully assured. And I've got to be said that I believed in Jesus. I understood that I needed Jesus to be my Lord and Saviour. And I received Jesus as my Lord prior to reading Colossians, prior to reading this passage that we're about to read. But when I read it, I was like, wow, everything's through him, by him, in him. Whoa, this is big stuff. I was so delighted to read it. This grounds them that Jesus is everything they need. And if you seek anything to be filled, like new Christians want to be filled. We want more. We want to understand more. And there's a danger of trying to be filled with the wrong thing. Because if you go after anything other than Jesus, it reduces Jesus. And in a way, it's like these new people in Christ, God's people, have been brought in. Jesus God had a party around his house and invited and brought in his new people. And it's a massive banquet. There's everything you can have to be filled. It's all there. You're with Jesus. You've been reconciled. You're friends. You were enemies, but now you're friends, and you've got everything there to make you full. And then someone knocks on the door, and you open the door, and someone says, do you want to come to my car and eat a Twix? You're like, really? No, of course not. I've got everything I need. And they keep, throughout this party, they just keep knocking on the door. Do you want this? Do you want an egg sandwich? Who likes an egg sandwich anyway? Who wants a scrambled egg sandwich? No, I've got everything I need here. I'm not going to move. I'm not going to leave Jesus. Like Peter said, that verse in, was it John? Yeah. I'm not going to leave. You have the words of life. Why would I leave? So the question here is, how do they stand firm? How do they stay with Jesus? How do they keep their faith? How can they be rooted? A friend asked me yesterday, my best friend, who is not a follower of Christ, just asked me yesterday, what are you talking about tomorrow? I said, stand firm in the gospel, that Jesus is supreme over creation and redemption. And he was like, what? And I was like, well, put it this way, Jesus is bigger and better than you thought. And that's what you kind of get when you read this passage, this beautiful passage in Colossians. We only have a small window of time, right? So we have this little window to understand everything. There's things that's gone before us, and then things that's going to happen after us. And we have this little time. And in this passage, it's all been discussed. It's all been told to us. What was there before and what's going to happen after. And this, like Jim was saying, this scripture's lofty. It's big. And things might surprise you. And things might irritate you. Things might go, oh, this is tough. But it's meant to reassure you that everything you have, everything you need is in Jesus. So, Stand firm, fully assured. That's the title we're given this series. And the title of today's talk is Stand Firm in the Gospel that Jesus is supreme over creation and redemption. He is supreme. He surpasses everything. Everything out there he surpasses. So Jesus is supreme over creation. Verse 15 on your sheets. Please read with me. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. What? The Greek word for image involves more than just a resemblance or a likeness. Paul is actually stating here, Jesus is God. More accurately, the Son is the image of the invisible God. This is the pre-incarnation of Jesus. But the Son didn't stop being the image of God in the incarnation of Jesus, because Jesus was the Emmanuel, God with us. He's the firstborn over all creation. Firstborn here meaning not just birth rank, birth order, but it describes who inherits who has inheritance, who is the leader. And in the firstborn is the same word where we get the meaning supreme. The one who holds first place, the one who holds first rank. And when you are ranked number one in heaven and earth, you inherit creation. In all fields of life, and especially sports, everyone's striving to be number one. And you may train and train and train, and you may get the number one position. Handful of people. Number one on earth. But what happens after that? Don't inherit anything. Just get a little trophy, some money. Well, that money goes, that trophy's lost, and your performance gets worse and worse, and you go down the ranks. Jesus has always been ranked number one in heaven and earth. And he always will be. And because he is, he inherits creation. So what? Well, if everything belongs to Jesus, there's nothing outside Jesus to gain. That's what the Colossian church should be thinking. There's nothing else to gain. Why should I go after this philosophy, this tradition, worship this, when everything belongs to Jesus? Jesus owns everything because he created everything. Verse 16, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. The Son is superior because he's created all things. There was a scientist, and he challenged God to a human-making competition. God's like, yeah, you're on. So the scientist was very happy about this, and he went down and he grabbed some dirt. And God said, hang on a second, go get your own dirt. There's creation and there's a creator. Jesus is the creator. The Son is the source of all things. All things originate with the Son. Everything that we see and things we don't see. And Paul here is alluding to the powers that be, the powers that all these people would believe in. Not so much in this day and age in England, but you don't have to go so far across the globe to see nations that still believe very much in the spiritual world. And we see that here that Jesus created these things. Whether thrones, powers, or rulers, or authorities. And we only have to read in Jude that the angels who did not keep their position of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling. If Jesus is the creator of the universe and everything, he's the creator of the spiritual world, he's the creator of all angels, even those who abandoned their proper dwelling. And the Son, knowing that they would do this, let it happen in his sovereign will, knowing that in next chapter, chapter 2, verse 15, that he would disarm the powers and authorities. He had made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. He triumphs over them. He disarms them. It's like, in films when a cop has to hand back their badge and gun. Disarms them on the cross. And then they will be destroyed when Jesus returns. We're going to have to go to Matthew. It's on your sheets. To see how the spirit world reacts to Jesus. How the spirit world submits to Jesus' authority. 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met Jesus. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. "What do you want with us, Son of God?" they shouted. "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" The spiritual world knows exactly who Jesus is. It knows exactly the authority that he has, how supreme he is over creation. The trouble is that we don't. Just to whet your appetite with the invisible world that's so hard to kind of think of, and you think, this must be lies. I was going to make a film about this story that someone who knew the person it happened to told me about. And this is so interesting. You have a lady, a Christian girl who was going back home and wanted to have a shortcut. And she this is in America, wanted to have a shortcut. And she took this shortcut, but went down the alley. But it reduced her time to get home by far. And she saw this man at the end of this alley, and she was praying to God to protect her. And she walked down this alley, went past this man, in the shadows, and then she thanked God that God has protected her. She woke up the next day with the news that a woman has been very violently attacked in the same alley by the same man that she just passed that night, the night before. She cooperates with the police, and then on the lineup, she could identify, that's the guy. But she couldn't stop there. She had to find out why he didn't pick her. So she gets to talk to this person through the police. Why didn't you attack me? And he said, "Well, you weren't alone. There was 2 men at either side of you." You may think, well, that's just nonsense. That's just nonsense. You just found that on Google. That's just a myth. But we're told that we can entertain angels without knowing it. We're told that by Jesus. There is a spiritual world that Jesus is fully in control of. Verse 17, "He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." Gravity wouldn't cease without Jesus. Planets will fall from the orbit without Jesus. The picture here is that the Son did not just make creation and just go, "Oh, that's that." But he's actively sustaining creation. He's holding it together. He's involved every second, every millisecond. He's involved in holding it together to sustain us, to give us life. And now we go from new creation, from first creation to new creation. And it starts with an interesting place, the church of all places. What's so impressive about the church? Oh, he is the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from among the dead, that in him everything he might have supremacy. He is the head of the body, the church. In life, the head is the source of life, right? The head is a source of life to the body. In life, the head is the source of direction for the body. I've been unfortunate enough to see someone with severe brain damage, to know that that's true. So in death, Jesus is the source of life for his people. Jesus is the head, the body is the church, we are the body. So in death, Jesus is a source of life for his people, and in death, Jesus is a source of direction for his people. The head is the first to experience resurrection, the body will follow. The head is the first to experience resurrection, the body will follow. If there was a race to resurrection, Jesus has won. He is supreme over death. He is superior over death. He qualified that death could not hold him. Jesus just surpassed death. The thing that we fear, Jesus just surpassed it. He's superior to death. He disarmed death for his people. He is the firstborn, and because he is the firstborn of death, so Jesus will inherit his people. Think of it like you know, people go kind of exploring caves, and there's a thing you have to go under. Jesus goes for, like the instructor goes first with the rope, goes first and leaves the rope. Yeah, I'm here. Okay, come. And the person with no experience of this can come and safely get from the other side. Verse 19. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him. All the world around them was offering them to be full with other things, like the people knocking on the door saying, do you want an egg sandwich? Do you want a Twix? How about a twirl? No. The language here is the fullness, to dwell. It's temple language, isn't it? It refers to Old Testament temple language. A place where people had to go to experience God. And now Christ replaces the temple, the place where we now go to experience God. This is where all that can be known and experienced of God can be found. It's in Jesus. The fullness dwells in him. There's so much, even like today, this will never end until resurrection, that we are offered other things to be full with. Well, you have to take this trip. You have to deny yourself of this, and then you'll fully know. You have to meditate, and you'll find the secret knowledge that surpasses all things. You have to take this drug. Everything will be open to you then. You'll understand the spiritual world. This will never fill anyone. It's always going to fall short. My second point is Jesus is supreme over redemption. He surpasses all ways of getting to God. Verse 20, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. when we need to reconcile broken relationships on earth, what do we do? Well, we start maybe with some flowers, a bit of chocolate, maybe a conversation. And if you have to, you say sorry. And you talk it through, and then you can't forget about it. That's how we make peace. The Berlin Wall, it divided east and west for 26 years. That wall had to be brought down for peace to come, so two opposing sides will come together. There is divisions, isn't there? There's hostility. There's breakdown in a relationship. But far worse, there's a breakdown in the relationship between creation and the Creator. And it's so bad that in verse 21 it explains the kind of state that we really are in without Jesus. Once you were alienated from God. That's a far away. That's very far away from dwelling. You were enemies in your minds because of your evil behaviours. And the word here, minds, not just referring to the organ of the mind, but the mindset. The factory settings of someone's mind is hostile to God. We oppose God. We don't use the creation for Him. We use it for ourselves. It ends on us. And from that, we become friends. Enemies becoming friends. Verse 22, but now He's reconciled you. How? By not doing this, saying this, doing that, worshipping this. How? How are we reconciled? By Christ's physical body through the death. To present you holy in His sight without blemish and free from accusation. It's interesting. The reason why we're reconciled, why? Is to present you holy in His sight, without blemish, free from accusation. When are you accused? Were you accused in court? Hebrews 9:27, people are destined to die once and then face judgment. That in Him, we'll be free of accusation. All those little deviances we do and think of, be free from. We won't be accused of anything. How is that possible? Well, the word holy and without blemish, it's Old Testament language for sacrifice. That Jesus is our sacrifice. He is our substitute. He died in our place. The record of debt that stood against us is nailed to the cross. He lived the life that we failed to live and died the death that was due to us. So we can be reconciled and we become friends and we can enjoy His presence. Jesus bought us out of slavery. He's transferred us to the kingdom of His Son. Through paying the price, redeeming us. And this next verse is troubling. Verse 22, but now He has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through the death to present you holy in His sight, without blemish, free from accusation. Verse 23, if you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held from the gospel. This is the gospel that you've heard, that you've been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant. Some people just gloss over this word if. Some people are terrified by this. Some people can't describe this. But it seems that that the grace of God and our faith is held perfectly when both hold on to that. The grace of God is given to us and we hold on to faith. It's perfect tension. How can we continue in our faith? Well, it says this, established and firm. That's what faith looks like. Established and firm is a foundation, right? It's settling, it's to be grounded, the house built on a rock. That let your faith be built on solid ground. It's meant to ground you. The characteristic of faith is it doesn't move. You don't lose your faith. That's a characteristic of faith. It doesn't move. It's established and firm. And that's why it's so important for any mature Christian or new Christian to understand this over and over again. That we can see that everything belongs to Jesus. He's supreme over creation, over redemption. To make us stand firm. That nothing else is superior to Jesus. No relationship, no power, nothing we can gain, no knowledge, nothing is superior to the gospel. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held from the gospel, don't leave Jesus. Don't walk out and get something far less. We have a responsibility to keep this tight, to hold. And it's interesting that I was thinking about this the other day. Well, if Jesus is going to present you, I mean, I present things that's of myself, it's easier to present things that's of you, that you've made. Well, if that's the reason why we're reconciled to be presented to God, then surely we should stay there, close to the presentation, close to the presenter. It's not that your life has to be established and firm. I mean, you go through periods of life where your life looks like a mess, so far removed from being established and firm. Your life can be an utter mess. But there's one thing that you don't need to, that you shouldn't lose, is your faith. The faith that can be described as small as a mustard seed. Don't lose your faith. You can be the least established person in the world. No one can care about you or anything. It doesn't really matter. You can be kicked to the ground. But if you have faith, well, then you'll be at the future presentation. And then from this, the gospel of grace, that Jesus has reconciled you by his blood shed on the cross, that you were enemies from God and now you're friends with him, is being preached throughout the world, throughout creation. And Paul has now become a servant to this. And this kind of leads on to the rest of the letter. Jim, you're going to start this one next week. How Paul's ministry is going. May look pathetic, may look terrible. Hey, Paul's in prison, by the way. this ain't going well, is it? This faith, this idea of like believing in Jesus, this isn't going very well, is it? But if everything belongs to Jesus, that's a different story altogether. So we're told not to leave this gospel of grace. Stand firm in it. Be assured by it. That the foundation is set by the Creator God himself. What more can you ask for? What more can you gain outside Jesus? There's nothing.